Hello and welcome to this session on the Tannenbaum Schmidt Continuum. What we are going to do is we're going to break down each individual element of the Tannenbaum Schmidt Continuum, and they are tells, sells, suggests, consults, joins, delegates, and abdicates. But first of all, let me give you a bit of an introduction about what the Tannenbaum Schmidt Continuum actually is. Now, it was a leadership model which was produced in 1958 by Robert Tannenbaum and Warren Schmidt, henceforth the name the Tannenbaum Schmidt Continuum. And it basically wanted to have a look at different leadership styles, whether it's a manager-centered versus a subordinate-centered. Now, a manager-centered is basically when the leader themselves makes all the decisions and they don't really delegate anything. Versus a subordinate-centered is when we focus on delegating as much as possible. And what's important, because it is a continuum, it highlights that leadership isn't actually this fixed trait. That we don't just have this one individual approach and that's it. Leadership, we can obviously adapt our styles depending on the different situations. And this is what it looks like. We can see that on the tells and sells side of things is when managers will mainly use their authority. Where on the delegates and abdicate side is when we have a greater freedom for our subordinates. And in essence, it's this continuum which basically says how autocratic or how democratic a leader is. Further left you go, the further and the more extreme the autocratic style is. Further right, the more democratic it is. Now, in the Tannenbaum Schmidt Continuum, there are three key elements that they identify that would basically tell the leader what would be the most appropriate style. And those are the leader, the team members, and the situation. Now, when we look at the leader themselves, we want to look at, first of all, the experience and the skills of the leader. We also want to look at their preferred style and whether they are, a confident leader and they trust their subordinates. The next element is the team members and the subordinates themselves. So this time we're looking at their skills and experience. We're looking at, are they a motivated workforce? What's the employee morale like? And within the team, do they actually care about, their own personal development needs? And finally, we'll look at what the Tannenbaum Schmidt looks at is the situation itself. So it looks at the nature of tasks that needs to be completed. Whether it's complex, whether it needs to be done urgently. What about the business environment? What about the different external factors? Is the situation a crisis where the decision needs to be made quickly? Or is it fairly stable and actually we can take our time with the decision? And the first section of our Tannenbaum Schmidt Continuum will be the managers and leader that tells. Now, when we look at this, is obviously on the far left, and this is our most extreme case of an autocratic leader. It's in the name. The leader will make the decision and then tell their subordinates about that. And because of this, there will be very little, if not zero, involvement from the subordinates in the decision making. So the leader themselves, they're not really consulting their subordinates, they're not asking for their opinion. It's this one-way flow of communication. We're not opening in this two-way dialogue. So of course, there will be no delegation, there will be no decentralization that will occur because the leader is making the decisions himself. And this type of leadership style, it can actually leave the employees feeling very demotivated because once again, delegation is an important non-financial method of motivation. It helps the employees get included a little bit more and feel like their opinions are valued. So what you might find is that actually because of this leadership style, we have a higher rate of labour turnover because there is this lack of autonomy, there's a lack of empowerment. But that doesn't mean that this tell approach doesn't work, because it does work in some situations. First of all, it works well during emergencies or crisis because a quick and decisive action is needed. There's no time for consultation. There's no time for talking to your employees and subordinates about their opinions. As well in industries such as construction, aviation or chemical plants where safety is very, very important and you have to stick to these strict procedures and protocols. So in these high-risk environments, this tells once again can be quite a valuable approach to have. As well, when new employees join an organisation, they often require clear, direct guidance to help them understand what is expected of them. Also in the low-skilled workforce, so where the workforce, they may lack any necessary skills or experience to make the decisions themselves. So having those instructions might be quite useful. And as well, any routine and repetitive tasks that require very minimal decision making. You don't necessarily need a lot of collaboration as well. Now, our next section of the Tannenbaum Schmidt Continuum will be our cells type of approach. Now, this is a little bit less extreme in terms of our autocratic approach. But the manager themselves, they will still make decisions without inputs from their subordinates. But this time, they will then start to explain to subordinates why they made the decision. So as I said, the managers, they're still making the decision themselves, but now they are trying to persuade and educate their subordinates about why their decision is best. Subordinates feel the manager has some concern for them, henceforth why it's a little bit less extreme as an approach for an autocratic leadership style. And this cells, it attempts to overcome resistance through discussion and persuasion. So no matter the reaction though of the subordinates, whether they like the decision or not, it still won't necessarily change the outcome. So we are still in that autocratic ways. The next section of our Tannenbaum Schmidt Continuum will be our suggest section. Now, this is where we're using a little bit less of our manager's authority, and we can start to see now that there's a little bit more freedom for our subordinates to work with. So, the manager, they will still make decisions without input from their subordinates, but they will explain to their subordinates why they made the decision, but now they will then allow their subordinates to ask any questions to understand the decision that is being made. And that's the important part, is that we give subordinates the opportunity to ask any questions. Because by giving the subordinates a chance to ask questions, they feel a little bit more now that their concerns are being heard. And it will once again, because we know what the concerns are as a leader, it gives us this second opportunity to try and overcome resistance through that discussion and persuasion. And we can use the feedback to enhance our understanding as a leader. Once again, you may still feel that there isn't a great deal of change between them, but it definitely is a little bit more democratic now in our approach because we're opening this two-way dialogue. And this engagement will begin to make subordinates feel that they are being involved. It helps subordinates feel that their opinions are being considered, as they are given that opportunity to get involved and understand the decision-making process. Like I said, when we are suggesting, we are opening this, two-way communication dialogue. It's now not just me telling my subordinates, this is what's happening, you got to get used to it. We invite them to now ask questions. The next one we are going to look at is our consult approach. This one is slap bang in the middle now, where we're basically half autocratic, half democratic. So what happens now is that our manager, our leader, they will make a provisional decision. And what we talk about provisional, this is temporary. This is made with the understanding that it can be reviewed, modified, or finalised later. But what we do now is that we start to invite discussion from our subordinates. The leader starts to listen to the advice and suggestions before they make that final decision. Subordinates, they're able to put their views forward. And by putting their views forward, whether they like the decision or whether they, disagree with the decision, it gives the opportunity for those subordinates to potentially modify the decision that is going to be made. And this then shows a lot more that the manager really recognises that their subordinates will have valuable input. That their subordinates, they will have a level of skills and expertise that will improve the quality of decisions. But once again, as I said, the manager or the leader will originally come up with what we call a provisional decision. Our next element on the Tannenbaum Schmidt Continuum will be our joins. Now, the joins is a lot more swaying towards a democratic now rather than our autocratic. And this is when the manager, they will present the problem to their subordinates. And they will want to work together on creating a solution or decision. So the team collectively evaluates all the different options and solutions that is possible. They will then look at the pros and cons of various suggestions and then come up with a decision that they think will be the best way to go forward. It's very effective because, especially when our subordinates are very skilled and they have a lot of knowledge and expertise. However, the manager is still, and the leader is still, the one to make the final decision. So whether they agree or, we've got two sets of arguments coming forward where half of the team wants to do, decision A, half of the team wants to do decision B. It's up to the manager to make that final call. And subordinates now will feel a lot more motivated because they are empowered, they are taking autonomy, they are having a little bit more control and input within the decision-making process. So you normally find that employee engagement, employee morale begins to start improving. Lower levels of labour turnover also starts to happen because we're swaying more into this democratic approach. The next element on Tannenbaum Schmidt will be delegates. And now we can start to see delegates is really swaying into the democratic approach. We have a lot more freedom for our subordinates and very little for the use of manager's authority. So what happens now is that the manager will tell their subordinates the problem. And they will provide what we call constraints. And I'll go over constraints and what that means in the next slide. And the team will solve the problem and come up with the final decision. So when we looked at joins before, it's still the manager's final say. This time, delegate is when the team, they make that final decision. Now, some examples of the constraints that the manager or leader will tell their subordinates that they have to keep within are the budget, the time frame, the amount of resources they're able to spend, the quality standards that the manager and the leader expects, the risk levels of the decision, some ethical guidelines, and any alignment with goals. And as you can imagine, because we are delegating, it is pretty much in the name of what we're doing. We're passing that authority down the hierarchy in the business. The manager, the leader, they're passing their authority down to their subordinates. And this is normally because the manager has a lot of trust in their subordinates. However, the manager is still ultimately responsible for the outcome of the decision, and they will have to take responsibility. So with this level of responsibility, there is a high level of trust between the manager and their subordinates, but whether the decision goes wrong, it's the manager, it's the leader who still has to step up. They're the ones who has to still take responsibility for any issues that do occur. And our final section of the Tannenbaum Schmidt Continuum is Abdicates. Now, Abdicates is all the way onto the right side. This is the highest level of freedom for subordinates, and it's a completely extreme case of a democratic approach. Now, the term abdicate, what that actually means is giving up a position of power or authority formally. And this is when the subordinates will have full freedom to define what the problems are and solve the problems for themselves. But there is a problem with this, because sometimes there can be a bit of a lack of direction, a lack of coordination, especially if your subordinates don't possess those necessary skills. Because when we looked at the start of this session, Tannenbaum Schmidt, they came up with those three factors, didn't they, of which leadership style will be best based on these three elements: the leader, the subordinates, or the team members, and the situation. Now, abdicate will only be good depending on the team members. So if they are highly skilled and, if they have a lot of experience. But such freedom, though, and if you do provide that, will grant them this autonomy, this empowerment. And this is a great way to start motivating your employees. But once again, similar to our delegates, the manager is still ultimately responsible, however, for the outcome of the decision and will take the full responsibility. Now, you might be asking, when does this abdicate approach work really well? There's a couple of scenarios that we can look into. As we already said, when we have a highly skilled and experienced team, and of course, if we are working in innovative and creative industries where you've got to give your subordinates that level of freedom so they can be creative, they can try new things. And also, if our team is very motivated by themselves, they don't require this external or these extrinsic motivational methods. Thank you so much for watching. I hope it's helped you understand a little bit more about what Tannenbaum Schmidt Continuum is. I'll see you in the next one.